Humans. Turns out they're really important. That's pretty cool. The next conversation is with Rachel Kobetz and Garrett Hope from PayPal. Rachel is the Chief Design Officer at PayPal, and she's done that job twice before. That's kind of an interesting perspective. She's brought Garrett Hope, who's the head of consumer products at PayPal, and they're going to talk a little bit about how they work together and what they've been doing as they try to transform a company. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage. Nice group. Everybody's here. They're all friendly. Just ignore the cameras.
No big deal.
Thanks for being here. So, Rachel, I said you're the Chief Design Officer at PayPal. That's been the role for the last 9 months. Maybe 9 long months. 9
awesome months.
9 awesome. That's better. Maybe share with folks what you've been working on and how you've been thinking about it.
Yeah, it's been nonstop since September, and it's been awesome. I joined the company the same month that our CEO joined, along with all of senior leadership and an influx of senior leaders into the company, all here to revolutionize commerce globally. And for me, there's been 2 areas where I've been focusing, really on our talent and our experiences themselves. For our experiences, I don't think that there's going to be one surface that we don't reinvent. So we're like completely in redesign mode. And then for our talent, there's work to be done, right? We want to really evolve our design practice. And so we've done everything from creating bar raiser hiring teams to bringing in specialized recruiters now, and also looking at our end-to-end candidate journey and giving it a reboot. So that's a redesign in itself.
So you brought bar raisers in, which is kind of that's a concept that's sort of floated around the industry. Is that something you picked up from the last few, the work at Expedia or Bank of America or somewhere else?
Back at Amazon. So that's something that I really feel you want your recruiting mechanisms to be like a machine. The candidate experience is the beginning of your employee experience. And so there's always work to be done to think about that journey on the front end and make it awesome.
That's great. It's interesting when people talk about talent, sometimes they say like, we need more talent or we need better talent or something. And then that answer, it seems like, is a lot more about changing the process so that you can bring in it sounds like probably an influx of folks. Is that right?
Yeah, we're doing 2 things. We're bringing in new talent because we want to embed new capabilities in the organization, but we're also working on upskilling and enhancing our talent that we have on staff as well, to be able to develop them for future leaning capabilities, right?
That's great.
So it's twofold.
Yeah. So the totally new senior leadership group, you all sort of start around the same time. Mm-hmm. Garrett, you were in that group, I believe, or maybe just prior, head of consumer products. How do you end up working with Rachel's, design team? How does that go?
Yeah. So I was there for a few months first. Before Rachel joined. And, we've been working really closely. As Rachel noted, I agree with her that no surface is going to probably remain untouched. We're trying to make some pretty big shifts in the product. And as we've been doing that, it's really important for us to be able to show what that vision looks like and then be able to create a truly amazing experience anchored around the value that we want to create for consumers. And that's been one of the things I've been working on, is ensuring that rather than thinking first about maybe the financial outcome at the end or maybe the team, how do we create cohesive experiences that are going to drive value for consumers? And Rachel's been an amazing partner in that as we've worked together to kind of change this culture and that thinking on product, working backwards from really what are the consumer problems and how do we solve them to create value.
So I don't know if you know this, but last year there was a whole discussion about getting rid of product managers. And you just described essentially that you are almost like an ally in the design work that, Rachel's team is also doing.
And that's an interesting way of thinking about it, because I would say that my career started out in engineering, and I actually moved into product management because I was more concerned about what the code and product I was creating was going to do for consumers. So I've become empowered by the consumer in my entire career journey. And so that's been the mantra that I've lived by, is like, our right to monetize comes from our ability to create value and create amazing experiences. And I've never had an amazing experience that didn't result in a really great outcome for the company I was at. Meanwhile, I've seen a lot go the other way. And so, yes, we absolutely work very closely together and are allies in this change.
I would say partners.
I would too.
Oh, that's much better than allies.
Yeah.
All right. So, Garrett, I think you're also a proponent of jobs to be done as well. Isn't that is that the way that you've sort of oriented the cultures collectively, or are there other frameworks you all have been working with?
Yeah, I mean, just tactically, I found that writing was something that there wasn't a lot of going on at when we joined PayPal. And as a result, you were dealing with nebulous ideas, and too often you ended up with the end result that you were trying to reach for the company, not for the consumer. So we start off now with a culture of writing anchored in the observations and the job to be done, essentially creating empathy with the user. Where can we actually help them create value, not just in our apps, but in their day-to-day life? How can we create that value? And so it's really the crisp job to be done that then sooner anchors all the different disciplines, engineers, designers, financial analysts, marketing, around what we're trying to do.
So I'm curious, Rachel, this culture of writing, is that complementary to sort of like a culture of visualization? Or the design teams, are you coaching them to write more, or how is that working?
Yeah, we definitely are working to develop more of a writing culture, because it provides clarity of thought, right? When you really have to sit down and write through a scenario end to end, you really can see where the gaps in your thinking are and where you can go deeper to close those gaps. So I think it's a great compliment to have that strong writing culture that assumes low context, so that people just starting can pick up that documentation and know where to begin, versus having to ask 15 people information. But it also then, is coupled with the idea of visualizing what that future is and how it unfolds. And so I think those two things together, that's the storytelling and narrative culture that we want to build at PayPal. And that's what we're working on.
Yeah. There was a great session yesterday from Bennett Miller, the filmmaker, was a lot about visualizing things and being able to sort of see the future you're trying to create through the visualizations. So, there's this talk about reinventing surfaces, and I feel like everyone is reinventing surfaces through AI. Like you just put the AI on it, and then you're laughing, Rachel.
Just sprinkle AI.
Just sprinkle the AI? Was that in the document? Is that how you? What does the document for something like that look like?
Yeah, you can't just start with the idea of sprinkling AI on it. It's actually a joke we've had at times with, what can a PM use AI on to see if they can obscure whether that was handwritten or AI generated. But when you think about it, actually, like the trade of starting focusing with the problem of our consumer or user first and foremost hasn't changed. You still have to observe and understand, think about how you can solve that problem. AI is making it interesting because your toolbox for solving the problem is expanding. And we're using that. And there are aspects that you have to think about, such as feedback loops and how you train and improve this model and help it to learn. But when you're looking at that, if you come at it just from the model standpoint, you end up in the wrong place of how can I get the user to give me information, rather than how can I actually serve their needs and build on that.
So what you're describing is that when you solve for your problem, which is getting feedback to train it, you don't create any user value unless you think about it that way. Is that the right way of thinking about it?
Well, more importantly, you can think about, how do I collect the information in a way that's actually helpful and tied and complementary? If you're collecting information in a way the user's not expecting, or it's a phantom collection, they might not even know that something's AI powered and getting smarter.
Yeah.
And so that's where we've been partnering, is think about how do you visually think about patterns like discovery plus training of a model in a way that's not creepy, that's super helpful and taking the customer forward.
And we also look at it from a different perspective, right? There's two areas where we're really thinking about AI, or generative AI. The point that he's making on product, we really start with the customer problem to be solved, and we use technology to enable that. It's in service of the experience that we're trying to create for customers, not the other way around where it's technology looking for a use case. And then on the flip, when we're thinking about our workflow, that's the other place that we're integrating AI and evaluating different tools to add to our toolkit, because we can streamline the work that we're doing and enable people to unleash more creativity across more surfaces faster. Then we enable people to really spend more time working on more strategic work and more strategic thinking. And so those are the two areas that we're really looking at.
Are you finding that you have to like, Garrett, you made the joke earlier about like, is this AI generated, or is this like a real, document that was written? Are you finding that you're having to pull teams into using AI, or are you finding that they're just doing it kind of on their own?
Oh, they're coming to us. They're very curious. We're not having to bring them to the tools. Anyone who's curious about what's new and what's out there and what emerging technology is out there is tinkering, right? And as makers, we're always thinking about what's next, right? So they lean right into that, and they're actually bringing it to the table and thinking through, like, where can it work best in their workflow? Now, mind you, I'm sure Garrett can chime in on this. We don't want, a PM using it to write their entire PRD, because we can kind of tell. But we do see that a lot of people are leveraging the technology.
Yeah, I would say it can add a lot of efficiency, and team members are realizing that. There's a great deal of efficiency that you can get if you have the direction of a problem, but you'd like to kind of get the high-level lay of the land on that problem that can come out of generative AI today to help a PM out. They can't stop there because the craft is the next 10% on this, but we are seeing the team members basically leaning into that, and why wouldn't they? It saves them time. It helps them focus on the things that really define and differentiate the product.
Yeah. Are you finding that you have to almost rein in the number of tools that are sort of being used? I mean, I say this as, Figma AI is, how beta's coming. Like, are you having to sort of say, like, these are the couple things that you can use, and is sort of security pushing you on that? I think I'm asking this question because many of the folks in this room would either need to push their teams to work differently, or their teams are all over the place, and that's maybe like a struggle that they have. I'm sort of curious how you've approached that.
Yeah, I don't think that we have the issue with fragmentation yet. I think it's more of, as we're evolving our ways of working, because the way that you work is just as important as what you make, we're thinking through what needs to happen at each stage of that journey throughout that process. And so we evaluate different tools along that. And then we're going to find which ones work the best, and then kind of, I would say, commercialize those across the enterprise. But we haven't had an issue where there's like 40 different things being used and we can't wrangle it. I haven't seen that yet.
Yeah. Okay. So that was about sort of ways of working, a little bit about, maybe generate some things, but don't generate everything, put the last bit in. What about what you were actually thinking about shipping with AI? Like the surfaces that, customers, whether they're merchants or whether they're consumers like me, what about those things? How are you approaching those changes with AI?
So I think that, our CEO has been direct on some of the things that we've been doing recently on trying to connect to what PayPal does amazingly well within the commercial space, and trying to connect more of that commercial experience into our app, helping consumers with running a cashback offers program, tailoring offers to their interests. And he also noted we're going to be taking that down to a SKU level of being able to figure out which products are of most interest to a consumer. And that's naturally an AI problem, especially if you want to solve that from a perspective of true interest and personalization, rather than one of solving for the largest minority. And so that's one of the things we're working through, we even see some of the early stages in our app right now as we're working through it, but really thinking about, like I was mentioning earlier, those feedback loops, where you'll be able to get to a scenario of how can I connect you with the exact product that's of interest to you based on your own shopping, based on your own signals, and then get you cash back on that in a way that's not creepy, that's intuitive, and that protects your privacy.
Yeah, and to build on that, consumers are really starting to have a higher level of expectations. The more that they're interacting with intelligent systems, the more that they come to expect it. And so personalization, we've been talking about personalization for years, but this is enabling us to truly create a one-to-one conversation with customers and move from transactions to relationships. And so I look at it from the human perspective of, when you've really dialed it into really solving my unmet needs, really meeting me where I am, and delivering something that no one else can, everybody wins.
Yep. Yeah. She says this as the person who suggested Rafiq Anadol, I think, originally for those who caught that talk. Rachel does love data.
Oh yeah, for sure. Data sculpture too.
Yeah. So, you're thinking about, SKU level, product level, sort of personalization for an individual consumer. I assume there's more to come after that. And, I'm just curious, are you all pushing your teams to do this, or is it similar to the workflow where the teams are saying, we want to do this, or we have this idea, or this problem I think that we need to solve, and maybe generative AI is part of that?
I think whenever you're making a move that's as substantial as what we're doing, when you're moving into an adjacency where it's not iteration, there is a degree of business and product strategy involved. And so they're certainly setting that direction. This has been one of those areas where, like, Rachel and I have literally worked together to figure out how do we visualize a scope for this direction that is larger than many of these teams. But the goal is not to specify it down to the nth degree to every pixel, but to really reduce it down to the jobs to be done in that experience. And we are starting to see, as we've gone through this, and I'd love, I think at least from my team on the PM side, I want to see is people are starting to see the light. Now they're starting to generate ideas. And I think you're going to find that based on the level that each individual looks at the problem space, they're going to connect faster or sooner when you're on a journey like we're on of really moving into an adjacent space rather than just trying to iterate and test and learn.
Completely agree.
And Rachel, what does that look like from your perspective? I can imagine a lot of folks in this room, like I would like to sit with my product lead and go through, this high level scope. Like how does that interaction look with Garrett?
Yeah, I think when Garrett and I are having conversations about what we want to solve for the customer, that is the initial conversation we're having. Like, how do we create impact for our customer and for the business at the same time? But it starts with the unmet needs or the latent needs, the jobs to be done, the things that we need to actually solve for them. That is the root of where we start. And so as you think of the conversations that work their way down through the organization, if we're aligned on shared outcomes, the outcomes we want for our customers, the outcomes we want for our company, then we don't prescribe how you get there, right? And so for our teams, what we want to do is create this culture of collaboration and creativity and systems thinking so that as these new emerging technologies come in, as we bring in the work that we want to do to really innovate on behalf of our customers, they're solving those challenges and figuring out the path to get there, but they're all aligned to shared outcomes. So whether it's product, design, engineering, data science, marketing, brand, et cetera, we think of like N in a box well beyond 3. We think of it as much more than that.
You used the phrase onion before. Is that still?
The layers of the onion?
Onion still in?
The onion is still in. Still hip.
Yeah, I would add to that, like, one of the things culturally is like, while product has certain accountabilities, we strongly believe that product doesn't have the market cornered on good ideas, right? So like you're mentioning marketing, you're mentioning design, even so our financial analysts, the sooner you can get the job to be done, the sooner you can get amazing ideas brought in. And the more you can get people thinking. So that's why we feel that the job to be done and that many in the box is working so well.
So I think the folks in the room are either thinking like, oh, well, I already do this, or, oh, I really wish that I could do this, and my organization is not maybe set up that way, and I would like to get there. Do you all have thoughts about how to sort of do that? I mean, you're 9 months into the shift. Like, what sort of advice would you give people trying to think about it that way?
Yeah, I mean, find coalition of the willing first, right? Understand who your allies are and who are going to run with you and lace up their sneaks and be your running partner, right? But also when you're in, it's also how we show up every single day, right? You create the culture that you want to have by the way that you show up in every moment in every interaction. So if you're in a meeting and everyone is talking about, metrics and data and the business and et cetera, but you don't hear like the customer at all, you're just like, where'd the customer go? That's your moment to be able to bring that into the conversation to keep the customer at the center of everything you do. So it can be as simple as, okay, what's the customer problem we're trying to solve? How do we know that's a problem? How will we know when we've solved it? Those 3 questions, they can be provocative to be able to start to make that conversation happen and start to shape that culture. Even if it's just in one meeting, it can be the fireworks that you need that start to spread that out amongst the culture.
Say those again. It was what?
What's the customer problem we're solving? How do we know that's a problem? And when will we know we solved it? And that's a forcing function to get people to think about that.
Yeah. You know, I think as you're on this journey, you all have your own sort of metrics for success. Like, you know, how do we know if this transformation has been successful? How will we know if maybe it's going off the rails a little bit? Those aren't the words you would use. Maybe walk folks through that so that if they're on this journey, like what should they be looking for? How should they be goaling their success?
Yeah, for me, it's three things. It's the experience, it's our culture, and it's market impact. So if I think about the experience, having an experience ecosystem that is modern, cohesive, meets people where they are, and really solves their actual customer problems, that's really where we want to be. And it's reflected back to us because people love using our products and services, and they're engaged with them, right? And so we notice that we're solving those needs. The other piece of it is the culture, right? Having a culture where everyone cares about the customer experience that we're delivering to market, and they have a high bar, and they're sweating the details, and we're sweating the details together. That's the type of culture we want to build, and that's where we know we're seeing like the success, like milestones, or kind of the measures for success. And then market impact, obviously. You know, being able to have an experience that's a cut above, tons of people engage with it. You're really solving those needs. We're going to see impact not just for our customers, but also for the business for that.
Yeah, huge plus one on the culture aspect of it. You know, you're putting a lot of energy in when you're trying to shift a company this large, you're trying to build this culture. But one of the metrics when you start hearing back the key principles from the team, especially if they don't even know you're listening or not there, you start seeing it in the writing, you start seeing those movements. You know, that's where you're reaching escape velocity at that point, and the team's carrying itself. And so I think that's one of the critical things. And for me, of course, to put a finer point on it, like the consumer experience has to be absolutely amazing, right? I mean, like the metric isn't just measured in dollars in the commercial aspect. It's really, can we see the engagement, the repeat rates? Can we ideally see people who love this product so much that you can start seeing it on social media and people sharing it with their friends? That's what we're really looking.
100%. Like we want our customer experience to be our competitive advantage.
Yeah. I love that point of that you brought up, the product lead brought up. Also, the you're not just looking for the numbers to go up. You're looking for these like qualitative signals that are almost unquantifiable to come back from the market. You know, from a culture perspective, do you expect these things to be reflected back to you like a month in, a week in, like 6 months in? Like what's the sort of time frame here? And I partially asked, you know, Rachel, you've done this a couple times, from your sort of like general experience as well. Like when is it like, oh, I really should be seeing this at this point?
It depends. That's the answer there. But I'll go into it. So I like to lead by example, meaning the way that I show up, the way I'm engaging, I want to also reward and incentivize the behaviors that we want to see in the culture to help shape it, because culture is not something you can actually design. It's something that is much more organic, and it grows on its own because you're literally shaping and fostering the environment. And so it's much like art. It's half what the artist intends and half what the viewer perceives, right? And so your people are the core of your culture. The people that walk in and out that virtual door every single day are your culture. And so as you want to change the mindset and behaviors of the organization, you have to embody those. And that has to be how you show up. And then when you see other people doing it, you reward and call those people out for being awesome in that moment. And it starts to create this virtuous cycle where more and more people are starting to behave in that way and starting to think that way and starting to show up in that way. And that's how you shape it together.
Go ahead, Garrett. I'll explore. So the thing that I'm curious about is, how do you see it if you don't see those people? If the team, you know, your team's distributed, everybody works like multiple days a week from home generally. How do you make that happen through the different communication tools that you have? Is it Docs? Is it, you know, Slack or Teams? Is it Zoom calls? Like what's the distribution method for the like culture you're trying to create?
I'll start and then flip to you. It's all of the above, right? It's in your writing, it's in your Slack messages, it's in your announcements, it's in your emails, it's all your comm strategy. It's how you're setting up forums and meetings and how those are working across the whole organization. every single moment that you have where you're having some sort of interaction with others, that's the moments that you can create that. And sometimes that's virtual and sometimes that's in person, right? So being very intentional about why we get together, when we get together, and what are the reasons for having that FaceTime, that is also a moment for shaping and creating culture as well. So I like a hybrid approach, both virtual and in person, IRL. But I do think that all of the mechanisms have to be used that are at your disposal. It can't just be one thing and you think that it's going to work. So to that end, when you're asking like how long should it be, where you start to see that culture reflected back to you, and you start to hear that vocabulary reflected back. If you have been doing all the things we're talking about here, it should be within your first quarter that you're starting to feel that vibe. But there's a lot of work to be done depending on where you're starting in what environment you're in.
Yeah. Garrett, did you want to?
Yeah, I'll just add that I think it's about consistency as well, right? I mean, like in every forum, we're fortunate enough to work at a company that has a CEO that says, literally, I want to start customer back, and he uses it all the time. I think Rachel and I have used that as permission to run very far with that. But like when we start meetings now, it's really complex. How do you actually think about the customer back? And so many of the reviews and design reviews, what's the problem you're solving? If you get consistent at some point, the teams start thinking that way, and they know that we're not going to move on to the what until we've talked about the why.
Yep.
So consistency, using every sort of interaction very intentionally, and then maybe hear some things back in the first quarter. It's maybe not perfect, but you get some lesson.
There you go.
Amazing perspective from you all. Thanks for sharing sort of the first, 9 months here for you, for the journey that PayPal's on. And it sounds like we can all look out for something that's personalized with AI at the SKU level. We're back here after lunch, which will be on the terrace in about an hour. So see you all then.
Thank you. I see.
Great job.
You're confused.